Elena had never seen a man command such fear and respect with just his presence. Marcus stood at the edge of the village marketplace, his dark leather armor scarred from countless battles, his hand resting casually on the hilt of his sword. The merchants fell silent when he approached, their eyes downcast, their hands trembling as they offered their finest goods without being asked. She watched from behind her father's fruit stall, mesmerized by the way people moved around him like water around a stone. Marcus was the kingdom's most feared warrior, the man who had single-handedly defended their borders for over a decade. Stories of his victories spread like wildfire through taverns and homes, each tale more incredible than the last. They said he had never lost a battle, never shown mercy to his enemies, never allowed anyone close enough to know the man beneath the armor. Elena's father, Thomas, noticed her staring and grabbed her arm roughly. "Stay away from that one," he whispered urgently. "Marcus brings nothing but death wherever he goes. No good can come from catching his attention." But Elena couldn't look away. There was something in Marcus's eyes that didn't match the stories. When he thought no one was watching, she caught glimpses of a deep sadness that seemed to weigh on his shoulders like invisible chains. The other villagers saw only the warrior, the legend, the man who could end lives with a single swing of his blade. Elena saw something else entirely. The marketplace buzzed with nervous energy as Marcus moved through the stalls. Vendors offered him their best produce, their finest crafted goods, anything to earn his favor or at least avoid his displeasure. He accepted nothing, paid for everything he took, and spoke only when necessary. His voice was deep and measured, each word carefully chosen. Elena found herself stepping out from behind the fruit stall, drawn by curiosity and something she couldn't quite name. Her father hissed her name, but she ignored him. Marcus was examining a display of hand-forged knives when she approached, her heart hammering against her ribs. "The blue steel ones are stronger," she said quietly, pointing to a set of blades that gleamed with an unusual metallic hue. "My uncle makes them. He adds something special to the metal that makes them hold their edge longer." Marcus turned slowly to look at her, and Elena felt the full weight of his attention. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, gray and turbulent, but not unkind. For a moment that stretched like hours, he studied her face as if trying to solve a puzzle. "Your uncle is skilled," he said finally, his voice softer than she had expected. "These are well crafted." The knife vendor, Elena's uncle Henrik, appeared suddenly at her side, his face pale with worry. "My lord, please forgive my niece. She speaks out of turn." "She speaks truthfully," Marcus replied, picking up one of the blue steel blades and testing its balance. "I'll take this one." As he placed coins on the counter, far more than the knife was worth, his fingers brushed against Elena's hand. The contact lasted only a second, but she felt something pass between them, a recognition that made her breath catch in her throat. "What's your name?" Marcus asked, his eyes never leaving hers. "Elena," she managed to say, though her voice sounded strange to her own ears. "Elena," he repeated, as if testing how the name felt on his tongue. "Thank you for the recommendation." He turned to leave, but Elena found herself speaking again before she could stop herself. "Why do you look so sad?" The question hung in the air like a blade suspended over a thread. The entire marketplace seemed to hold its breath. Henrik grabbed Elena's arm, ready to pull her away, but Marcus raised a hand to stop him. "What makes you think I'm sad?" Marcus asked, turning back to face her fully. Elena swallowed hard, aware that she was treading on dangerous ground. "Your eyes," she said simply. "They look like my grandmother's did near the end. Like you're carrying something too heavy for one person to bear." Something shifted in Marcus's expression, a crack in the armor that he wore not just on his body, but around his heart. For just a moment, Elena saw through to the man underneath, and what she saw there made her want to reach out and offer comfort to someone who had clearly been alone for far too long. "You see too much," Marcus said quietly. But there was no anger in his voice, only a kind of wonder. "Maybe everyone else just doesn't look hard enough," Elena replied. Marcus studied her for another long moment, then nodded once. "Perhaps they don't," he agreed. "Perhaps they're afraid of what they might find." "Are you afraid?" Elena asked, surprising herself with her boldness. A ghost of a smile touched the corner of Marcus's mouth, the first genuine expression she had seen from him. "Every day," he admitted. "But not of battle, not of death. I'm afraid of—" He stopped himself, the wall slamming back into place around his heart. "I should go. Will I see you again?" The words tumbled out before Elena could stop them. Marcus paused at the edge of her uncle's stall, his back to her. "This is not a path you want to walk," he said without turning around. "I am not a man you want to know." "Shouldn't that be my choice to make?" Elena called after him. He stopped walking but didn't turn back. "Some choices lead to nothing but pain," he said. "I've learned that the hard way." Then he was gone, disappearing into the crowd like smoke, leaving Elena standing in the marketplace with her heart racing and her mind full of questions. Her uncle and father both began scolding her immediately, their voices a blur of warnings and reproaches, but she barely heard them. All she could think about was the moment when Marcus's carefully constructed mask had slipped, revealing the wounded man hiding beneath the legend. Everyone in the village knew stories about Marcus the warrior, Marcus the killer, Marcus the man no one dared to cross. But Elena was beginning to suspect that the most important story about Marcus was the one no one knew, the one he kept locked away in the silence of his own heart. That night, as she lay in her small bed above her father's shop, Elena stared at the ceiling and wondered what secret could be so terrible that a man would choose to carry it alone rather than risk sharing it with another soul. She thought about the sadness in his eyes, the way he had said he was afraid, and the careful distance he kept from everyone around him. Something told her that Marcus's secret was the key to understanding not just who he was, but who he could become if someone was brave enough to help him unlock the chains he had wrapped around his own heart. Elena had always been too curious for her own good, and as sleep finally claimed her, she knew that her encounter with the warrior was only the beginning of a story that would change both their lives forever. 3 days passed before Elena saw Marcus again. She had been helping her Aunt Mary tend to the sick in the village when word came that raiders were approaching from the eastern border. The messenger, a young soldier covered in dust and sweat, spoke in breathless gasps about a group of bandits who had been terrorizing nearby settlements. Elena watched from the healer's hut as the village men gathered in the square, their faces grim with worry. They were farmers and craftsmen, not warriors. Against trained raiders, they would stand little chance. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a blade. Then Marcus appeared, as if summoned by the village's need. He rode into the square on a massive black horse, his armor gleaming in the afternoon sun. The relief on the villagers' faces was immediate and obvious. With Marcus there, they felt safe. "How many?" Marcus asked the messenger, his voice carrying across the square. 20, maybe 25, the young soldier replied. "They're armed and dangerous, my lord. They've already burned 2 farms and taken everything of value." Marcus nodded grimly. "How far?" "Half a day's ride, moving this way fast." Elena watched as Marcus dismounted and began giving orders. His transformation was remarkable. Gone was any trace of the vulnerable man she had glimpsed in the marketplace. This was the legendary warrior, the tactical genius who had won dozens of battles. He positioned the village defenders, set up watch points, and organized the civilians with the efficiency of someone who had done this countless times before. "Women and children to the church," he commanded. "It's the strongest building. Old men and anyone who can't fight go with them. Everyone else, find whatever weapons you can and meet me at the east gate." Elena's father appeared at her side, his face pale with fear. "Come, Elena, we need to get to safety." But Elena found herself shaking her head. "Aunt Mary needs help preparing supplies for the wounded." "I'm staying." "Elena, no," Thomas protested. "It's too dangerous." Before Elena could argue, Marcus's voice cut through their conversation. "Let her help the healer," he said, having overheard their exchange. "We'll need someone with steady hands if this goes badly." Thomas looked like he wanted to argue, but no one argued with Marcus. He gave his daughter one last worried look and hurried away to join the other defenders. As the villagers scattered to their assigned positions, Elena found herself alone with Marcus for a moment. He was checking his weapons, testing the draw of his sword, adjusting the straps on his armor. Every movement was practiced and precise. "Are you afraid?" Elena asked, remembering his admission from their first meeting. Marcus paused in his preparations and looked at her. "Yes," he said simply, "but not of the raiders." "Then what?" He was quiet for so long that Elena thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm afraid of what I become in battle, of what I'm capable of when the fighting starts." Before Elena could ask what he meant, shouts arose from the Eastern Watch. The raiders were coming earlier than expected. Marcus's expression hardened and Elena watched as he seemed to disappear inside himself, becoming something cold and distant and utterly focused. "Stay in the healer's hut," he told her firmly. "No matter what you hear, no matter what happens, don't come outside until it's over." The battle began with the thunder of hoofbeats and the clash of steel. Elena tried to follow Marcus's instructions, tried to focus on preparing bandages and healing supplies, but the sounds from outside were impossible to ignore. She could hear Marcus's voice above the chaos, shouting orders, coordinating the defense. Then she heard something that made her blood run cold. It was a sound like nothing she had ever heard before, a roar of pure rage and violence that seemed to come from somewhere deep and primal. It was followed by screams, but not from the villagers. The raiders were screaming. Unable to contain her curiosity any longer, Elena crept to the window and peered outside. What she saw made her gasp and stumble backward. Marcus stood in the center of the square, surrounded by fallen raiders. His sword moved like liquid lightning, cutting down anyone who came near him. But it wasn't just his skill that shocked Elena. It was the look on his face, the absolute emptiness in his eyes. As if Marcus the man had vanished entirely and left behind only a perfect killing machine. She watched in horrified fascination as 3 raiders tried to attack him at once. Marcus moved between them like a dancer, his blade finding vital spots with surgical precision. He fought without wasted motion, without mercy, without any trace of humanity. It was like watching a force of nature, beautiful and terrible at the same time. The battle was over in less than an hour. The raiders who weren't dead had fled and the village was safe. But Elena couldn't forget what she had seen. Couldn't shake the image of Marcus transformed into something that barely seemed human. As the villagers emerged from their hiding places to tend to the wounded and count their blessings, Elena saw Marcus standing alone at the edge of the square. He had cleaned his sword and sheathed it, but his hands were shaking. The cold emptiness was gone from his eyes, replaced by something that looked almost like horror. Elena approached him slowly, as she might approach a wounded animal. "Marcus?" He turned to look at her, and she saw that his face was pale beneath the dirt and sweat. "You were supposed to stay inside," he said. But there was no anger in his voice, only exhaustion. "I know," Elena admitted. "I couldn't help myself. I had to see. And now you have," Marcus said quietly. "Now you know what I really am." Elena studied his face, seeing the shame and self-loathing that he was trying so hard to hide. "What I saw," she said carefully, "was someone protecting people he cares about. Someone willing to become a monster so that others could remain human." Marcus laughed, but it was a bitter sound with no humor in it. "Is that what you think? That I'm some kind of noble protector? Aren't you? I'm a killer, Elena. That's all I've ever been, all I'll ever be. When the fighting starts, I stop being human. I become something else, something that enjoys the violence, that craves it." His voice was raw with pain. "Do you understand? I don't just kill because I have to. Part of me likes it." Elena felt her heart break a little at the anguish in his voice. "Is that your secret?" she asked softly. "The thing you're afraid to tell anyone?" Marcus turned away from her, his shoulders rigid with tension. "One of them," he admitted. "But not the worst. What could be worse than that?" "The reason I became this way," Marcus said, his voice so quiet she had to strain to hear him. "The reason I can't allow anyone to get close to me." Elena wanted to ask more questions, wanted to understand what had shaped this complicated, tortured man. But something in his posture warned her that he had already revealed more than he intended. For now, it was enough that he had trusted her with even this much of his truth. "Thank you," she said instead. Marcus turned back to her, confusion evident on his face. "For what? For keeping us safe? For being willing to carry that burden so the rest of us don't have to?" For a moment, Marcus looked at her as if she had spoken in a foreign language. Then something shifted in his expression, a tiny crack in the wall he had built around himself. "You see too much," he said again, echoing his words from their first meeting. "Maybe," Elena agreed, "but I'm not afraid of what I see." "You should be," Marcus warned. "My secrets have a way of destroying everything they touch." "Then maybe it's time to stop carrying them alone," Elena suggested boldly. Marcus stared at her for a long moment, and Elena could see the war being fought behind his eyes. Part of him wanted to trust her, wanted to believe that someone could know the truth about him and not turn away in disgust. But another part, the part that had been hurt too deeply to heal easily, was terrified of what might happen if he opened that door. "I can't," he said finally. "I won't risk it." "Risk what?" "Destroying you the way I've destroyed everyone else who tried to get close to me." With that cryptic statement, Marcus walked away, leaving Elena standing in the square with more questions than answers. But she had learned something important. Marcus's secret wasn't just about his nature as a warrior. There was something in his past, something that had convinced him he was dangerous to anyone who cared about him. As Elena watched him disappear into the growing darkness, she made a silent promise to herself. Whatever Marcus was hiding, whatever had wounded him so deeply that he couldn't bear to share it, she would find a way to help him carry the load. Everyone deserved to have at least one person who knew their whole truth and loved them anyway. Marcus had spent too many years being that person for no one. Elena began visiting the old church at dawn, knowing that Marcus came there each morning before the village woke. She had discovered this by accident a week after the raider attack, when she rose early to gather herbs in the nearby woods. She had seen him kneeling before the simple wooden altar, his head bowed, his lips moving in what looked like prayer. She didn't approach him that first morning, or the second, or the third. Instead, she watched from a distance, trying to understand this new piece of the puzzle that was Marcus. The fierce warrior who could cut down 20 men without breaking a sweat spent every dawn on his knees, speaking to God in whispers too quiet for anyone else to hear. On the fourth morning, Elena finally worked up the courage to enter the church. Marcus didn't look up when she slipped through the heavy wooden doors, but she saw his shoulders tense slightly. She sat in the back pew and waited, her hands folded in her lap, until he finished whatever private conversation he was having with the divine. When Marcus finally rose and turned toward the door, he found Elena watching him with patient curiosity. "You shouldn't be here," he said, but there was no real anger in his voice. "Why?" Elena asked. "It's God's house. Everyone is welcome." "Not everyone brings as much blood on their hands as I do," Marcus replied, moving toward the door. Elena stood quickly, blocking his path. "Is that what you pray about? The people you've killed?" Marcus stopped, his jaw tightening. "Among other things, what other things?" For a moment, Elena thought he would push past her and leave without answering. But something in her expression must have reached him because he sighed and sank down into the nearest pew. "I pray for forgiveness," he said quietly, "for the strength to bear what I've done, for the courage to face each new day without giving in to the darkness that lives inside me." Elena sat down beside him, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body. What darkness? Marcus was quiet for so long that Elena wondered if he had decided not to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible in the empty church. "When I was 17, I fell in love with a girl named Lydia. She was beautiful and kind and full of light, everything I wasn't." His hands clenched into fists on his knees. "I thought I could protect her from the world, from the violence that seemed to follow me everywhere. I was wrong." Elena felt her heart sink as she began to understand where this story was leading. "What happened?" "My enemies found out about her. They knew that hurting her would hurt me more than any wound they could inflict on my body." Marcus's voice was hollow, empty of everything except pain. "They took her while I was away on a mission for the king. When I returned, I found her body in our home." The silence that followed was deafening. Elena felt tears burning behind her eyes. Not just for Lydia, but for the young man Marcus had been, the one who had loved someone enough to believe he could keep her safe. "I'm sorry," she whispered, knowing the words were inadequate but needing to say them anyway. "That's not the worst part," Marcus continued, his voice growing even quieter. "The worst part is what I did next. I hunted down every man responsible for her death. I tortured them, Elena. I made them suffer in ways that would make you sick to even hear about. And the entire time I enjoyed it." Elena's breath caught in her throat. She could see the shame radiating from Marcus like heat from a fire. "I told myself I was getting justice for Lydia. But that was a lie. I was feeding the monster that had always lived inside me, the part of me that craved violence and pain. When it was over, when they were all dead, I realized that I had become something Lydia would have been horrified by. I had let her murder turn me into the very thing she would have run from." "You were grieving," Elena said softly. "You were in pain." "That's what I told myself for a long time," Marcus replied. "But grief doesn't explain what happened next. After Lydia's death, I found that I couldn't stop. The violence, the killing, it had become a need like hunger or thirst. Every battle was an excuse to feed that darkness. Every enemy was an opportunity to let the monster out to play. Elena struggled to process what she was hearing. The man sitting beside her looked broken, defeated, as if confessing these truths was physically painful. I tried to control it, Marcus continued. I threw myself into serving the kingdom, telling myself that at least I was pointing my violence in the right direction. But it was never about duty or honor. It was about finding acceptable targets for my bloodlust. Is that why you stay away from people? Elena asked. Because you're afraid you'll hurt them? I know I'll hurt them, Marcus corrected. Everyone who gets close to me dies, Elena. Lydia was just the first. There have been others over the years. Friends, fellow soldiers, even innocent bystanders who had the misfortune of being near me when my enemies decided to send a message. Elena felt a chill run down her spine as the full scope of Marcus's isolation became clear. So you decided to stay alone. It was the only way to protect people from what I am, Marcus said. The only way to make sure my darkness doesn't spread to anyone else? Elena sat in silence for several minutes, absorbing everything Marcus had told her. She could understand now why he carried himself like a man under a terrible burden, why he looked at the world with such sadness. He had convinced himself that he was a curse, that his very presence brought death and destruction to everyone around him. Do you really believe that? She asked finally. That you're beyond redemption? Marcus looked at her with surprise, as if he had expected her to run screaming from the church. Isn't it obvious? I'm a monster, Elena. I enjoy killing. I crave violence the way other men crave food or wine or the touch of a woman. What could possibly redeem someone like that? Love, Elena said simply. Forgiveness. The choice to be better than what your pain made you. Marcus laughed bitterly. Love got Lydia killed. Forgiveness is something I'll never deserve. And as for choice, he shook his head. I've made my choices, Elena. I chose revenge over justice, violence over peace, isolation over connection. There's no coming back from that, says who? Elena challenged. You're still alive, Marcus. You're still here, still fighting for people who need protection. If you were really the monster you think you are, would you spend every morning praying for forgiveness? Would you feel guilty about the violence? Would you sacrifice your own happiness to keep others safe? Marcus stared at her as if she had slapped him. You don't understand. You don't know what I'm capable of. I saw you in battle, Elena reminded him. I saw what you became when the fighting started. But I also saw you afterward, shaking with horror at what you had done. A true monster wouldn't feel that horror, Marcus. A true monster would be proud. You're naive, Marcus said, but there was no conviction in his voice. Maybe, Elena agreed, but I'm also right. You've spent so many years believing you're irredeemable that you can't see the truth anymore. You're not a monster, Marcus. You're a man who was broken by loss and trauma, who made some terrible choices in his pain, and who has been punishing himself ever since. Marcus stood abruptly, pacing to the front of the church like a caged animal. Even if that were true, it doesn't change anything. The people I've killed are still dead. The darkness inside me is still there, waiting for the next opportunity to surface. I am what I am, Elena. You are what you choose to be, Elena countered, standing as well. Every day, every moment, you get to choose who you want to be. The fact that you choose to protect people instead of harming them, the fact that you pray for forgiveness, the fact that you're trying to warn me away from you right now, all of that proves that you're not the monster you think you are. And what about the next person who gets close to me? Marcus demanded, turning to face her. What about when my enemies decide to hurt them to get to me? What about when the darkness takes over and I become something that even you can't recognize? Elena walked slowly toward him, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. Then we'll face it together, she said. Whatever comes, whatever threats arise, we'll handle them as a team instead of you trying to carry everything alone. No, Marcus said firmly, backing away from her. I won't let you become another Lydia. I won't be responsible for your death. You're not responsible for Lydia's death either, Elena said gently. The men who killed her are responsible. You're just the one who's been carrying the guilt. Marcus stopped backing away, his eyes wide with shock. How can you say that? If I had never loved her, if I had stayed away from her, she would still be alive. If your enemies hadn't been evil enough to murder an innocent woman, she would still be alive. Elena corrected. You can't control other people's choices, Marcus. You can only control your own. And I choose to stay away from you, Marcus said. But his voice lacked its earlier certainty. Elena took another step closer, close enough now to reach out and touch his arm. Is that really what you choose? Or is that just what fear is telling you to choose? Marcus looked down at her hand on his arm, then back up at her face. Elena could see the war raging behind his eyes, the desperate longing fighting against years of ingrained terror. I'm afraid, he admitted quietly. I know, Elena said, but maybe it's time to be brave in a different way. Maybe it's time to trust that some things are worth the risk. For a moment, Elena thought she had reached him. She could see something shifting in his expression, a tiny crack of hope breaking through the wall of despair he had built around himself. Then the church door slammed open and both of them spun toward the sound. A young soldier stood in the doorway, his face flushed with exertion. My Lord Marcus, the soldier gasped. The king requests your immediate presence. There's been an attack on the capital. We ride at first light. Elena felt her heart sink as she watched Marcus transform before her eyes. The vulnerable man who had been sharing his deepest secrets disappeared, replaced by the cold, efficient warrior she had first met in the marketplace. I'll be ready, Marcus told the soldier who bowed and hurried away. When they were alone again, Marcus turned back to Elena, but the moment of connection was gone. The walls were back up, higher and stronger than ever. This conversation never happened, he said firmly. Forget everything I told you, Elena. Forget about me. Find a good man who can give you the life you deserve. Before Elena could protest, Marcus strode from the church, leaving her standing alone in the morning light streaming through the stained glass windows. But as she watched him go, Elena made a decision that would change both their lives forever. She wasn't going to forget. She wasn't going to give up. And she certainly wasn't going to let Marcus face whatever was coming next all by himself. I don't want you to be anything except yourself, Elena said. The real Marcus, the one who's been hiding behind all this armor and rage and guilt. The one who's afraid of his own capacity for love because he knows how much it hurts to lose it. Slowly, Marcus lowered the knife. The cold emptiness in his eyes was being replaced by something that looked almost like hope. Fragile and uncertain, but unmistakably real. What if I can't find my way back? He asked, his voice barely audible. Then I'll help you, Elena said without hesitation. We'll find it together. Marcus looked at her for a long moment, and Elena could see him truly seeing her for the first time since she had entered the room. The recognition in his eyes was like watching someone wake up from a terrible nightmare. Elena, he whispered, her name on his lips like a prayer. I'm here, she said simply. Marcus dropped the knife, the blade clattering on the stone floor. His hands were shaking as he stared at them, as if he couldn't believe what they had been doing. God, what have I done? He breathed. What you thought you had to do, Elena said gently. But it's not too late to choose a different path. Marcus looked around the room again, taking in the blood, the instruments of torture, the barely conscious prisoner. His face crumpled with horror and self-disgust. How can you even look at me, he asked. How can you stand to be in the same room as someone who could do this? Because I see the man you really are, Elena said. And that man would never forgive himself if he walked away from this without trying to make it right. Marcus nodded slowly, understanding what she meant. He walked over to the prisoner and began untying the ropes that bound him to the chair. I'm sorry, he said quietly to the beaten man. What I did to you was inexcusable. You'll be given medical treatment and released. The prisoner looked up at him with confusion and terror, clearly not understanding what had changed. Marcus helped him to his feet, supporting his weight as he called for the guards to take the man to the medical station. When they were alone again, Marcus turned back to Elena. I don't know how to come back from this, he admitted. I don't know how to be anything other than what I've become. One choice at a time, Elena said. One moment at a time. You don't have to figure it all out at once. Marcus nodded, then looked around the room one more time. I need to clean this up. I need to find a different way to get the information we need. We'll find a way, Elena agreed. Together. As Marcus began the long process of dismantling the chamber of horrors he had created, Elena knew that this was only the beginning. The real work of healing, of learning to live with his nature without being consumed by it, would take time. But for the first time since she had met him, she believed that Marcus might actually have a chance at finding peace. The darkness would always be part of him, but it no longer had to define him. And with someone who understood both his light and his shadows standing beside him, Marcus finally had a reason to believe that redemption might be possible after all. Elena didn't hesitate. While Marcus was preparing for his journey to the capital, she made preparations of her own. She had never traveled beyond her village, had never been more than a day's walk from the home where she was born, but she knew with absolute certainty that she couldn't let Marcus leave without her. She told her father she was going to help Aunt Mary with a difficult birth in the next village, a lie that came easier than she expected. Thomas was too worried about the news from the capital to question her closely. She packed light, taking only essential supplies and the few coins she had saved over the years. Elena reached the crossroads just as dawn was breaking, hiding behind a cluster of oak trees where she could watch the main road. She didn't have to wait long. Marcus appeared with a small group of the king's soldiers, riding hard toward the capital. Elena waited until they were almost out of sight, then spurred her father's old mare into motion, following at a safe distance. The journey took 3 days, and Elena had to be clever to avoid being spotted. She stayed far enough behind that the dust from her horse wouldn't give her away, and she took care to hide whenever the group ahead stopped to rest. At night, she made cold camps away from the road, wrapping herself in her cloak and trying not to think about the wolves and bandits that might be lurking in the darkness. On the 3rd day, Elena crested a hill and saw the capital spread out below her like something from a fairy tale. The city was enormous, easily 10 times larger than her village, with towering walls and magnificent buildings that seemed to reach toward the sky. But even from a distance, she could see that something was wrong. Smoke rose from several areas within the walls, and there were too many people on the roads leading away from the city. Elena rode closer, her heart sinking as the scope of the disaster became clear. The attack hadn't just been a simple raid. Entire sections of the city had been burned, and refugees were streaming out of the gates with whatever possessions they could carry. The capital was in chaos. She followed the flow of refugees to a large camp that had been set up outside the city walls. Tents and makeshift shelters stretched as far as the eye could see, filled with families who had lost their homes and possessions. Elena dismounted and led her horse through the camp, looking for any sign of Marcus or his men. "Terrible business, this," said an old man sitting outside a patched tent. His left arm was wrapped in bloody bandages and his clothes were scorched. "Never seen anything like it in 40 years. What happened?" Elena asked, kneeling beside him. "Assassins," the old man replied, his voice bitter, "came in the night pretending to be merchants. Set fires all through the lower city while their main force attacked the palace. By the time anyone realized what was happening, half the city was in flames." Elena's blood ran cold. "The palace? What happened to the king?" "Dead," the old man said flatly, "along with most of his family. The few guards who survived said it was a massacre. They killed everyone they could find, even the servants and stable boys." Elena felt sick. If the king was dead, that meant Marcus had ridden into a trap. She stood quickly, scanning the crowd of refugees for any familiar faces. "Where are the king's soldiers now?" she asked. "Those that are left are trying to maintain order in the city," the old man replied. "But there aren't many. Most of the royal guard died defending the palace." Elena thanked the man and hurried deeper into the camp, her mind racing. She needed to find Marcus, needed to warn him if it wasn't already too late. But the camp was huge and chaotic, filled with thousands of displaced people. As she searched, Elena began to piece together more of the story from fragments of conversation. The attack had been planned for months, possibly years. The assassins had known exactly where to strike, which meant they'd had inside information. Someone close to the royal family had betrayed them. After hours of searching, Elena finally spotted a familiar face. Henrik, the old soldier who sometimes came to their village for supplies, was helping to organize the distribution of food to the refugees. His arm was in a sling, but he was alive. "Henrik," Elena called, pushing through the crowd toward him. The old soldier turned, his eyes widening in surprise when he saw her. "Elena, what in the name of all that's holy are you doing here?" "I'm looking for Marcus," she said breathlessly. "Is he alive? Was he in the palace when it happened?" Henrik's expression grew grim. "He's alive, but he's changed since the attack. Something broke inside him when he saw what they did to the royal family. He's been leading the hunt for the surviving assassins and—" Henrik paused, looking uncomfortable. "And what?" "He's not taking prisoners, Elena. The men who've been with him say he's become something terrible, something that barely seems human anymore. They're starting to fear him almost as much as they fear the enemy. Elena felt her heart clench with worry and understanding. Marcus's darkest nature had been unleashed by the massacre, and without anyone to anchor him to his humanity, he was losing himself to the violence he had always struggled to control. "Where is he now?" she asked. "Somewhere in the city hunting," Henrik replied. "Elena, you need to leave this place. Go back to your village." "This isn't a place for someone like you." "Someone like me," Elena challenged. "Someone innocent," Henrik said gently. "Someone who hasn't been touched by this kind of darkness. The capital is a dangerous place right now, especially for a young woman traveling alone." Elena understood Henrik's concern, but she also knew she couldn't leave. Not when Marcus needed her most, not when he was falling back into the very patterns he had fought so hard to escape. "Can you get me into the city?" she asked. Henrik stared at her in shock. "Absolutely not. It's far too dangerous." "Please," Elena said urgently. "Marcus is in trouble. I might be the only one who can help him." "Help him with what? He's the most dangerous man in the kingdom. He doesn't need help from anyone. He needs help remembering who he really is underneath all that armor and pain," Elena said firmly. "Henrik, I've seen him when his guard is down. I know there's still a good man in there, but he's drowning in guilt and rage. If someone doesn't reach him soon, he's going to lose himself completely." Henrik studied her face for a long moment, seeing something there that made him sigh deeply. "You're in love with him, aren't you?" Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she didn't deny it. "Yes, and I think he cares about me too, even though he's too afraid to admit it." "Elena, listen to me carefully," Henrik said, his voice urgent. "The Marcus who's in that city right now isn't the man you think you know. The soldiers who've seen him work say he's become something out of nightmares. He's torturing information out of prisoners, executing suspects without trial, leaving a trail of blood everywhere he goes." "Then he needs me even more," Elena insisted. "Henrik, please. I came all this way because I believe Marcus can be saved. Don't make me try to get into the city alone." The old soldier looked at her for another long moment, then cursed under his breath. "You're going to get yourself killed and probably me along with you. Is that a yes?" "That's a yes," Henrik said reluctantly. "But we do this my way, and you follow my orders without question." "Understood?" Elena nodded eagerly. "Understood." Henrik led her to a quiet corner of the camp where he had set up his own small shelter. He pulled out a bundle of clothes and handed them to her. "Put these on," he said. "You'll pass for a young soldier from a distance. Keep your head down and don't speak unless I tell you to." Elena quickly changed into the rough soldier's garb, binding her hair back and pulling a cap low over her face. When she emerged from behind the shelter, Henrik nodded approvingly. "Not perfect, but it'll do in the chaos," he said. "Now listen carefully. We're going in through the east gate where I know the guards. I'll tell them you're my nephew, carrying messages from the refugee camp. Once we're inside, we'll need to find Marcus quickly. The longer we stay in the city, the more likely we are to get caught up in something we can't handle." They made their way toward the city as the sun began to set, joining a small group of soldiers who were returning from patrol. Henrik's plan worked perfectly. The guards at the gate recognized him and waved them through without much scrutiny. Inside the city walls, Elena was shocked by the extent of the destruction. Entire blocks had been reduced to smoking rubble, and the streets were littered with debris and abandoned belongings. Soldiers patrolled in small groups, their faces grim and their weapons ready. "The palace is this way," Henrik said quietly, leading her through the maze of damaged streets. "If Marcus is still hunting, that's where he'll be working from." As they walked, Elena began to hear stories from the soldiers they passed. Tales of a dark figure moving through the city like death itself, finding enemies in shadows and extracting information through methods that made hardened warriors sick to their stomachs. The name Marcus was spoken in whispers, and even his own men seemed afraid of what he had become. When they reached the palace district, Elena gasped at the sight before her. The magnificent royal residence had been partially destroyed, its walls blackened by fire and its gardens trampled into mud. Bodies still lay in some areas covered by sheets but not yet removed for burial. "This way," Henrik said, leading her toward a building that appeared to have been converted into a command post. Soldiers moved in and out, carrying reports and receiving orders. The weeks that followed were among the most difficult of Marcus's life. With Elena's help, he began the painful process of rebuilding himself from the inside out. It wasn't easy. The habits of violence and isolation that had sustained him for so long didn't disappear overnight. Elena stayed in the capital, finding work as a healer's assistant in the makeshift hospital that had been set up for the refugees. Every evening she would find Marcus in the small room he had taken near the palace, and together they would talk through the challenges of the day. Some nights, Marcus would tell her about the dreams that haunted his sleep, visions of all the people he had killed over the years. Other nights he would confess his fears about losing control again, about the darkness that still whispered in his ear during moments of stress. Elena listened to all of it without judgment, offering comfort when she could and simply being present when words weren't enough. Slowly, Marcus began to change his approach to hunting the remaining assassins. Instead of torture and summary execution, he started using investigation and negotiation. It was slower work, more frustrating, but Elena helped him see that the extra effort was worth it if it meant preserving his humanity. Today we captured 3 more of them, Marcus told Elena one evening as they walked through the palace gardens, which were slowly being restored after the attack. They were hiding in a warehouse near the docks. How did you get them to talk? Elena asked, though she was fairly certain she knew the answer. Patience, Marcus said with a slight smile, and the promise that cooperation would be rewarded with fair treatment. It took longer than my old methods, but we learned everything we needed to know. Elena felt a warm glow of pride at the satisfaction in his voice. This was the man she had known he could be, the one who found strength in mercy rather than cruelty. There's something else, Marcus continued, his expression growing more serious. We think we've found the person who betrayed the royal family to the assassins. Elena's heart sank. She had been dreading this moment, knowing that when Marcus finally confronted the traitor, he would face his greatest test yet. Who is it? She asked quietly. Sir Roderick, the king's former advisor. The evidence is overwhelming. He provided the assassins with detailed plans of the palace, told them when the guards would be changing shifts, even gave them the location of the royal family's private chambers. Elena could see the rage building in Marcus's eyes as he spoke, the familiar darkness trying to claw its way back to the surface. She reached out and took his hand, squeezing gently. What will you do? She asked. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working as he fought an internal battle. What I should have done all along, he said finally. Arrest him and bring him before a proper tribunal for judgment. Not what you want to do. Marcus's smile was grim. What I want to do would make what I did in that torture chamber look like a gentle conversation. Roderick's betrayal cost dozens of innocent lives, including children. The old me would have made him suffer for days before allowing him to die. But you're not the old you anymore, Elena said softly. No, Marcus agreed. Thanks to you, I'm not. Though I'll admit it's still a struggle every day. Elena squeezed his hand again. Struggle means you're fighting. Fighting means there's still hope. The next morning, Marcus led a small group of soldiers to Roderick's estate on the outskirts of the city. Elena had wanted to come with them, but Marcus had gently but firmly refused. This was something he needed to face on his own, a test of how far he had truly come. Roderick didn't resist arrest. In fact, he seemed almost relieved when Marcus appeared at his door with the charges. The older man looked like he had aged years in the weeks since the assassination. His hair gone completely gray and his face drawn with exhaustion. I wondered when you would come, Roderick said as the soldiers placed him in chains. I've been expecting this visit. Why? Marcus asked, struggling to keep his voice level. Why did you betray them? They trusted you. Roderick's laugh was bitter and empty. They threatened my daughter, he said simply. The assassins took her months ago. They said they would kill her slowly, piece by piece, if I didn't cooperate. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. Your daughter? She's been dead for months, Roderick continued, his voice breaking slightly. I found out too late that they killed her the moment they had what they needed from me. I betrayed my king and watched dozens of innocent people die, all for nothing. The revelation hit Marcus like a physical blow. He had expected to find a simple traitor motivated by greed or ambition. Instead, he found a broken father who had made an impossible choice and lost everything anyway. For a moment, the old Marcus surfaced, the one who would have seen Roderick's story as irrelevant, who would have focused only on the betrayal and the deaths that resulted from it. But the new Marcus, the one Elena was helping him become, saw something else entirely. "I'm sorry for your loss," Marcus said quietly. Roderick looked up at him in surprise. "You're sorry?" "I'm the one who betrayed your king." "You're also a father who is trying to save his child," Marcus replied. "That doesn't excuse what you did, but it explains it. And I understand what it's like to have the people you love used against you." The journey back to the capital was made in thoughtful silence. Marcus found himself thinking about choices and consequences, about the difference between justice and revenge, about the complexity of human motivation. A year ago, he would have killed Roderick without a second thought. Now he was actually considering speaking in favor of mercy at the man's trial. When he returned to find Elena waiting for him, Marcus realized that something fundamental had shifted inside him. The rage that had driven him for so long was still there, but it no longer controlled him. He was learning to channel it into something constructive rather than destructive. "How did it go?" Elena asked, searching his face for signs of the old darkness. "Better than I expected," Marcus said honestly. "Roderick is a broken man who made a terrible choice trying to save someone he loved. I found myself feeling sorry for him instead of wanting to kill him." Elena's smile was radiant. "That's growth, Marcus. Real, meaningful change." "It's still hard," Marcus admitted. "Part of me wants to make him pay for what he did, but a bigger part of me understands that he's already paying a price worse than anything I could inflict on him." They walked together toward the hospital where Elena worked, passing through the rebuilding city. Everywhere they looked, there were signs of recovery and renewal. Buildings were being repaired, businesses were reopening, and the people were slowly returning to their normal lives. "I've been thinking," Marcus said as they walked, "about what comes next, when this is all over. When the last of the assassins are caught and the city is fully rebuilt. What about it? I don't think I can go back to being what I was before," Marcus said carefully. "The king's enforcer, the lone warrior who solves problems with violence. That version of me is too dangerous, too close to the monster I became." Elena nodded thoughtfully. "What would you want to do instead?" "I don't know," Marcus admitted. "For the first time in my adult life, I'm not sure what my purpose is supposed to be. All I know is that I want to build something instead of just destroying things. Maybe that's enough for now," Elena suggested. "Maybe it's okay to not have all the answers right away." Marcus stopped walking and turned to face her fully. "Elena, I need to tell you something. These past weeks, working with you, talking with you, learning to see the world through your eyes, it's changed me in ways I didn't think were possible." Elena felt her heart begin to race. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I love you," Marcus said simply. "I know it's complicated. I know I'm not the kind of man you deserve, but I needed you to know. You've saved me in every way a person can be saved." Elena felt tears spring to her eyes, but they were tears of joy rather than sadness. "I love you too," she said. "I have since that first day in the marketplace when I saw past your armor to the man underneath." Marcus reached out tentatively and took her hands in his. "I can't promise I'll be easy to love," he warned. "I still have dark days, still struggle with the things I've done. The man you fell in love with is still learning how to exist. Then we'll learn together," Elena said firmly. "Love isn't about finding someone perfect, Marcus. It's about finding someone worth growing with." Marcus pulled her into his arms then, holding her close as if she might disappear if he let go. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to hope for a future that wasn't defined by violence and solitude. Around them, the capital continued its process of healing and renewal. But neither Marcus nor Elena was thinking about the city anymore. They were thinking about the possibility of building a life together, of facing whatever challenges lay ahead as a team rather than as isolated individuals. The darkness would always be part of Marcus, but Elena had taught him that darkness didn't have to mean despair. Sometimes it just meant that the light, when it finally came, would be that much more precious for having been earned through struggle and sacrifice. As they stood there in each other's arms, both of them knew that their story was far from over. There would be more challenges, more tests of Marcus's resolve, more moments when the old patterns would try to reassert themselves. But for the first time, Marcus believed that he might actually be strong enough to face those challenges without losing himself in the process. And Elena, watching the peace that had settled over the man she loved, knew that sometimes the greatest act of courage wasn't charging into battle with a sword. Sometimes it was choosing to trust another person with the broken pieces of your heart, and believing that together you could build something beautiful from the ruins. 2 years had passed since the assassination of the royal family, and the kingdom had found its footing under the rule of the king's younger brother, Prince Edmund. The capital had been rebuilt, stronger and more beautiful than before, and life had settled into a peaceful rhythm that many had thought they would never see again. Marcus stood at the window of the small house he now shared with Elena, watching her tend to the garden she had planted in their courtyard. She moved among the flowers and herbs with the same gentle patience she had shown him during his darkest moments, coaxing life and beauty from soil that had once seemed barren. He still served the crown, but his role had changed dramatically. Instead of being the kingdom's primary instrument of violence, he had become something entirely new. King Edmund had created a position for him as royal mediator, someone who could use his reputation and experience to resolve conflicts before they escalated to bloodshed. It was challenging work that required all the skills Marcus had developed over the years. But in service of peace rather than war, he negotiated with bandits instead of simply killing them, mediated disputes between noble houses instead of choosing sides, and used his fearsome reputation to intimidate potential troublemakers into behaving themselves. "You're thinking too loudly," Elena called from the garden, not looking up from the roses she was pruning. "I can hear your thoughts from here." Marcus smiled and walked outside to join her. Even after 2 years of marriage, she could still read him like an open book. It was a gift that had saved him countless times when he was struggling to find his way back to humanity. "The king wants to send me north," he said, settling on the stone bench beside her garden. "There's been trouble with raiders from across the border. The local lords are asking for military intervention." Elena set down her pruning shears and turned to face him. "And you're worried about how you'll handle it?" "I'm worried about who I might become if I'm away from you for too long," Marcus admitted. "These past 2 years, you've been my anchor. Without you there to remind me of who I want to be." "You're stronger than you think," Elena said gently, sitting beside him on the bench. The man who used to lose himself in violence couldn't have spent yesterday teaching sword techniques to the palace guards, without once raising his voice in anger. "You've changed, Marcus. Really changed, it was true." Just the day before, Marcus had been instructing a group of young guards in combat techniques when one of them had made a potentially dangerous mistake that could have injured another student. The old Marcus would have erupted in fury, possibly even striking the careless guard. Instead, he had calmly corrected the mistake and used it as a teaching moment about the importance of discipline and awareness. "But this is different," Marcus said. "Up north, I'll be dealing with real violence again, real enemies who need to be stopped. What if being in that environment brings back the old patterns?" Elena took his hand, running her thumb over the scars that covered his knuckles. "Then you'll remember what you're fighting for," she said simply. "Not revenge, not the thrill of violence, but the protection of innocent people who can't protect themselves." Marcus squeezed her hand gratefully. "I wish you could come with me." "So do I," Elena replied. "But the hospital here needs me, especially with winter coming. And besides, you need to prove to yourself that you can face these challenges on your own." Marcus knew she was right, but the thought of being separated from her for weeks or possibly months filled him with anxiety. Elena had become more than just his wife. She was his conscience, his guide back to the light whenever the darkness threatened to reclaim him. "There's something else," Marcus said hesitantly. "Something I haven't told you about the northern situation." Elena waited patiently for him to continue, her expression open and encouraging. "The raiders aren't just random bandits," Marcus said. "They're being led by someone who knows me, someone from my past." "Who?" Marcus took a deep breath before answering. "His name is Victor. He used to be one of my men, back when I was young and angry and thought violence was the solution to every problem. I trained him, taught him everything I knew about warfare and killing." Elena felt a chill run down her spine. "What happened to him?" "I sent him on a mission that went wrong. Badly wrong. His entire unit was killed and Victor barely escaped with his life. He blamed me for their deaths, said I had sent them into a trap without proper intelligence or support." Marcus's voice grew heavy with old guilt. "The worst part is, he was right. I was so eager for glory, so convinced of my own brilliance that I didn't take the time to properly plan the mission. Good men died because of my arrogance. And now he's leading raids against our people," Elena said, understanding the full scope of the challenge Marcus was facing. "It's not just revenge against me," Marcus explained. Victor has convinced himself that the entire kingdom is corrupt, that the only way to find justice is to tear it all down and start over. He's gathered other bitter, angry men around him, soldiers who feel the world has wronged them. Elena could see the weight of responsibility settling on Marcus's shoulders. This wasn't just about stopping a group of raiders. It was about confronting his own past mistakes and trying to save a man he had once cared about from a path of destruction. "You feel responsible for what he's become," she observed. "I am responsible," Marcus said flatly. "Victor was a good soldier, a decent man before I broke him. Now he's become everything I used to be, the embodiment of every mistake I ever made. So this is your chance to make it right," Elena said. "Not by killing him, but by showing him that there's another way." Marcus looked at her with surprise. "You think I should try to save him, after everything he's done?" "I think you should try to reach him the same way I reached you," Elena replied. "You were lost in darkness too, Marcus. If Victor was once a good man, maybe there's still something good left in him. And if there isn't, if he's too far gone to be saved?" Elena was quiet for a moment, considering her answer carefully. "Then you'll do what you have to do," she said finally. "But you'll do it as the man you are now, not the man you used to be. You'll try every other option first, and if violence becomes necessary, it will be because you had no choice, not because you wanted it." Marcus nodded slowly, understanding.